So today, as we discuss statistics, we're going to be discussing histograms, which are another representation of the distribution of our data, show kind of intervals that our data is collected into and the frequency of those intervals. So histograms are another excellent representation of statistical values. So to define a histogram, it is a type of bar graph that divides the data into equal intervals and represents the frequency of data within those intervals by the height of the bars. So a couple things to also remember about a histogram is when creating one, the bars should be equal in width and touch, but not overlap. Okay. So here's an example of a histogram. All right. In this histogram, we have a title. It's Ages of Assistant Principals. We have an x-axis with intervals 26 to 35, 36 to 45, 46 to 55, 56 to 65, and 66 to 75. And then we have a y-axis that has 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Okay, so the horizontal axis looks like it represents the ages of the assistant principals in the town, city, state, whatever it is that we're representing here. The vertical axis represents the number, or you might see it called the frequency of assistant principals in that age bracket. Okay, so it's just going to be the number of assistant principals. Alright, so here's the ages, here's the number of them, and that correlates with that age bracket. So the next question, how many assistant principals were between the ages of 56 and 65? So here is my 56 to 65, and I look up and there are 6. So 6 principals in that age. And then the other question is, how many assistant principals are 45 or younger? So here is my 36 to 45 bracket. Everything below that is going to be younger than that. So I have 21 and 5. So a total of 26 principals are in that age bracket. So histograms are fairly straightforward, but we do have another piece of information that you could be asked from that. So one of the questions that you may see from a histogram is not just about reading the data, but sometimes they'll ask you to estimate the average of the data. So we multiply the midpoint of each interval by the frequency and then find the average of those values in order to be able to find that. So let's start this very simply. So we can't find the exact average because we don't know the exact values. We just know how many of each interval there is. So I could have, between 36 and 45, I could have 21 values that are all 37. Or I could have it spread out. It all just depends. So I'm having to estimate the best way that I can the average of this data. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my first interval. So the first interval, there are ages 26 to 35. So I'm going to find the midpoint of that. So I would find basically the average of those two numbers. So the midpoint would be 26 plus 35 divided by 2. That's going to give me a value of 30.5 when I put that with the calculator. and then I'm going to take that midpoint and multiply it by the frequency. And so it happened there were 5 assistant principals at that age, and roughly age 30.5. So I multiply that by 5, and I get 152.5. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing with interval 2. So interval 2, I take 36 and 45, and I find the midpoint. And so middle between 36 and 45 is going to be 40.5. And I had 21 in that value. So I'm going to multiply that 40.5 times 21. And I get 850.5. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing for interval 3, sorry. Interval 3 is 46 to 55. So 46 plus 55 divided by 2 is going to give me 50.5 as my midpoint. And there were 9 of these assistant principals. So when I multiply that, I get 454.5. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the next one. I'm going to do interval 4. So I'm going to average that. I have 56 plus 65. Divide that by 2. I have a midpoint of 60.5. And there are 6 assistant principals in that age range. So that's a point 363. And then interval 5. I have 66 and 75 divided by 2. That's 70.5 is my midpoint. And there was 1 in that age range, so 70.5. So now that I have this, I'm going to average these values. So 152.5 plus 850.5 plus 454.5 plus 363 plus 70.5. And I'm going to be dividing it by those 5 intervals. Actually, I'm going to be dividing it by the total number of values. And there's 21 and 5 and 9 and 6 and 1, which is a total of 42 assistant principals. So 152.5 plus 850.5 plus 454.5 plus 363 plus 70.5, all added together. Is 1891. And then because we went ahead and put each of these in individually rather than going by the number of intervals, because we put in each individual or the number of assistant principals in each interval band, we're going to be dividing this number by 42, which is the 5 plus 21 plus 9 plus 6 plus 1. And so when I divide that 1891 by 42, I get a value of 45.0238 and so on. So the estimated mean of the data is an age of 45 years old. Okay, which makes sense because most of the data kind of falls in this range of 36 to 45. And so the average most likely is going to be somewhere in that in that range band. So so that would be an estimated average for this data.